Here's how I made a complete video game in 3 days. I was competing in the Mini Jam 145, the theme for this was Frozen, and the limitation was inconvenient superpowers. So as soon as the theme got released I immediately started thinking about ideas. My first idea was to make a game where you are going through an ice castle but you breathe fire. That would have worked, but I couldn't think of how I could make a whole game out of that. Then I got the genius idea of making a racing game with inconvenient power-ups. While this isn't exactly what the limitation was, it was still the best I could come up with. However, I have always loved those 2D racing games where you just raced in laps against your friends. Now, I'm not gonna make this multiplayer, but I will make some cool ARI for it. Next, before I even got started on the game I needed to create a plan of how I could get this done in 3 days. So my plan was on Friday to get the movement done. I probably could have gotten a lot more done on Friday, but I'm still in high school. On Saturday my plan was to create the map in the morning, and then the AI in the afternoon. Finally on Sunday I wanted to create the power-ups in the morning, and create the menu and UI in the evening. So, I got home from school on Friday, and I immediately got to work on the movement. I started by making a cube. Then I started coding to get it to move back and forth. I took a lot of time on this part to make sure the movement was as smooth and responsive as possible. I came up with a solution: you start at a set speed, but the longer you hold down the direction the faster you can get. I think that this solution would help give it that racing feel and give you good acceleration, while still making it responsive and snappy. Next I made some wall jumping, which I totally didn't have to watch YouTube videos to do and still didn't end up using them. Now the movement is feeling pretty good, and since I still had a little time on Friday night I started to work on the character. Now I had no idea what I wanted to do for this, so I started to make a slime type of character, but it really didn't feel right, because it was too rigid. I tried adding some animations, but I just couldn't get the feel right.
1 day later.
The next morning I woke up with the genius idea of making it a soft body. I tried turning my existing model into a squishy soft body, but it was all glitchy, and I had never done anything like this before, so I just decided to follow a tutorial exactly and make it a circular blob. That worked, but since it was the player I needed to make it follow the player, so I just attached some springs to the player controller. Now that we've got good movement and good controls I decided to get to work on the map. I started by drawing up these simple ice sprites in Krita, and then I exported them and put them into Unity. I'm no artist, but I think the game is looking okay so far. Next I wanted to add some obstacles into the map, so first I made some obstacles and then I made a gun that shoots snowballs. This was my little sketch of the map that I was going off of. I made the icicles hang from the ceiling and drop down either randomly or when a player hits it. Then when it hits the ground it sticks. And for the snowball gun, I just threw together some colored blocks and made it face towards a random player, then randomly shoot. When a player gets hit by one of its snowballs its movement gets locked for a few seconds and this cool frozen effect goes over it. Then I thought the map looked pretty good, and next I got to work on the ARI. I was pretty happy at this point because I was still on schedule. But the AI actually ended up being a lot simpler than I thought it would be. I just made it move right if it was on the bottom half and left when it was on the top half. Then I gave it some sensors behind and in front of it, and if it sees an obstacle it jumps. Then if it has a wall on its right it jumps off it, but if it has a wall on its left it slides down. And since it was so much easier than I thought I got to work on the power-ups on Saturday. I started by thinking of power-ups that could be good and bad depending on how you use them, or even how lucky you are. The first one I made was a dash, but it would either send you forwards or backwards. That actually made it a lot easier to create because I didn't need to know which direction the player was going. The next one was a float. I thought this could make it easier going up, but would be a little inconvenient when you are trying to go down. Then it was the end of the day and I was ahead of schedule, so I decided to call it a day.
1 day later.
I got to work on the other 2 power-ups I had in mind, which were a magnet which makes you gravitate towards a random player. This could be good because it could make you go ahead, but it could also be bad because it could bring you to a player behind you. The next, and final power-up was an ice block summon which just randomly spawned a bunch of ice cubes. Now I got to work on the mechanic to pick up the power-ups, and it was pretty simple. When you go through this rainbow mystery banner you get a random power-up. Then I just worked on some polish, adding some effects, particles, and sounds. I quickly whipped up this song in beatbox. and then made some sound effects with an 8-bit sound effect maker. And I got to work on the menus. I'm really happy with how they turned out, and I don't think I've ever made something that looked this good before. I started with the main menu and used a cool font and added some jellies bouncing around. Then I created an instructions page which tells you how to play, and I added a few videos to demonstrate what the power-ups do. Now at this point I had a lot of time left, so I made a bigger map with some cool blocks. Wow, so cool. Then I added a map select page and I was done. Really happy with how this all turned out. You can go play the game on itch.io if you want, I'll put the link in the description, but you could also search for the name, which is Superish Jelly Racers.
Now enjoy the gameplay.